One of the bigger problems that explains a lot of the injustices over the last 3 or so years is the conflation of science and morality, or perhaps even the substitution of science for morality. The idea that science isn't just a way of searching for and acquiring knowledge, but a guide for how to live a proper life, which of course it isn't. Science is a way to assess what is true, but it's not a way to assess right and wrong. And that's not to dismiss science, of course. The scientific method is the best we have for figuring out how the natural world works. It's just to say that science itself isn't everything. There are important questions it doesn't necessarily answer. It's not beakers and test tubes that tell us how to live a virtuous life. It's something else. Some moral framework that tells us right and wrong, and how to behave rightly or wrongly. An example to illustrate the point: in the context of COVID, we could just kill an infected person to stop the spread, just execute him. Scientifically, it would be effective. The virus needs a host for transmission, so deny the host and deny the transmission. The reason we don't do that is not because it's scientifically ineffective. The reason we don't do that is because it's morally wrong. It's because of some higher moral structure beyond scientific efficacy that guides our behavior, a structure that virology and immunology don't and can't explain. In other words, what is scientifically effective is not the same thing as what's right. These things can overlap, but they are distinct. And if they're distinct, one will have to be prioritized over the other. How to select that priority is not a scientific question. It's a question of values. And the faithful of this emerging scientific priesthood might call that a ridiculous exaggeration of a hypothetical. And granted, Fauci hasn't ever said, hang yourself to slow the spread, yet is the key qualifier. And that's the point. Without any explanation for the moral structure that would prevent that logic, I'm left to assume that there is none. I'm left to assume that the reason he hasn't said that is only a matter of time, not a matter of principle. And even if it is an exaggeration, it's only a few degrees beyond reality anyway. A primary reason for the unrest that is finally happening in China is effectively a death sentence to slow the spread. A fire caused by a faulty power strip killed 10 people in an apartment building on Thursday. These deaths alleged to be a direct result of victims being locked in their units and other barriers to entry and exit. These a feature of the Chinese zero COVID policy, according to videos and images posted to social media. As the fire burned, those it killed were helpless to escape, and those watching were helpless to assist. Chinese authorities deny obstructing escape or rescue in any way, but of course, Chinese authorities deny everything in every way, including the origin of the virus itself. So at this point, I'll take their denial as confirmation. So sure, they burned alive, but hey, at least they didn't get COVID. That is the logic in China. And if we don't think critically, there is little in the prevailing logic that would prevent something similar here. The proof is in the departing statements of the man himself, Dr. Fauci, doing his farewell tour before he leaves office by the same mantra he's pushed for years now: just one more, and then it'll finally be over, except in this case, it's media appearances, not vaccines. Or both, actually. He made his last White House briefing room appearance last week to push for just one more shot that both works perfectly, but also fades quickly.
As good as the vaccine is, the immunity and protection wanes over time.
All while he's internally laughing at you, not just because he knows that he won't be held accountable, but because you will, actually, for his 6-figure salary and for his cushy retirement that he'll probably collect in perpetuity. With all of his connections to the science, I'm sure he'll achieve immortality soon. But even if he doesn't, his retirement package will be the largest for a federal employee in the history of the country. He bankrupts your business and then sends you the bill. That is the arrangement here. And before he collects, he's appearing on CNN to remove any lingering misunderstanding that there are any moral considerations that factor into his worldview. Fauci appeared to discuss his opposition to Chinese tyranny and the zero COVID strategy, and it's notable that this segment was in no way some kind of trap. Not that CNN would do that to him anyway, but Fauci didn't have some question about Chinese misconduct just thrust upon him. He volunteered his own description of it as severe and draconian, over the weekend. The question was simply to elaborate on a prior comment and note the analysis here. The Chinese tyranny is severe and draconian, not because it violates the rights of the people, but just because it's done for the wrong reasons. It just doesn't have the right goal. But if it did, well, then it could be okay.
You've called the Chinese government's response to COVID severe and draconian. China's official news agency today published an op-ed asserting that the country's strict COVID measures are scientific and effective. Are they?
Well, when you want to shut down in order to interrupt immediately a process that's going on like the spread of infection, there should be a purpose to it. Like you want to make sure you get enough ventilators or enough PPE, or you want to get your population vaccinated. The comment that I made about their severe actions that they've taken is that you have to have an end game. What's the purpose? If the purpose is let's get all the people vaccinated, particularly the elderly, then okay for a temporary period of time to do that.
In other words, the ends of stopping the spread justify the means of barricading you in your home. So long as the ends, or the purpose as he calls them, are scientifically legitimate, well, then the means are appropriate. See, the problem with the Chinese is just that their ends are wrong, not that their means are inherently immoral. The problem is not locking you inside and burning you alive. The problem is not forcing a vaccine on you as a requirement to escape the imprisonment. And in case you think that's just one bad quote misunderstood, Fauci clarifies it isn't. Once again, he says a policy is justified by its ends, not by its means. He says the problem with Chinese lockdowns is not that they're morally wrong. The problem is that people just won't put up with them, which makes them ineffective.
But they have very, very strict type of a lockdown. They're locking people in their homes, which is really, they can't even go out and, from what I hear, shop or walk a dog or something like that. That's going to create a lot of pushback on the part of the population if there's no underlying purpose of what you want to do.
The logic is not what's right and wrong. The logic is what you can get away with. That's the logic of a criminal, not the logic of the saint that he's portrayed to be. And speaking of what you can get away with, that logic was the strategy in his court deposition last week, too. In a lawsuit from the Missouri and Louisiana attorneys general about social media censorship, Fauci was deposed behind closed doors. You can't see it or listen to it, but according to sources who did listen, Fauci was very forgetful about things he probably would like to get away with. A lot of I can't recalls for answers for a guy who otherwise supposedly has all the answers to everything. One thing he could recall, though, is his admiration for and his inspiration from China. Fauci said that one of his NIAID deputies went to China in early 2020 at the outbreak of the virus and reported back that China appeared to be controlling the viral spread through harsh lockdowns. So Fauci soon decided the United States should emulate that strategy. It's what we had to do. There were freezer trucks in New York full of bodies, Fauci said. And now there are quiet apartments full of bodies from drug overdoses or alcohol poisoning, or in China, from burning alive. And how one supposedly prevented the other is still entirely unexplained as a matter of either science or morality. But once again, human rights did not factor in to Fauci's policy assessment. And I guess, why would they? After all, they are not a scientific concept. They are a moral concept. What is the scientific explanation for the rights of the individual? What is the scientific explanation for why they should be prioritized over all attempts to minimize them? That's not a question that you answer with a calculator. That's a question that you answer with a conscience that recognizes that human life has value and purpose, and therefore you have an obligation to respect it, not just when it serves certain purposes, but always for its own sake. Though I suppose too much respect might be why we're in this situation at all. Only in an overly respectful society could this Keebler elf destroy our lives and not just get away with it, but get paid handsomely for the abuse. The only booster this guy needs is the one to sit at the adults' table, yet we let him boss us around like he's Khal Drogo. So maybe Fauci is at least a little right. Maybe a little abuse is sometimes okay, so long as it serves the right purposes, of course. So how about just a light dab of adhesive and only a modest, reasonable plume to serve as a sorely needed reminder so that he can recall at his deposition next time. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.